20. Inbound Kennedy, we see delays. Fullerton to Division, there was an earlier crash. It's 30 minutes O'Hare to downtown, quicker in the express. Outbound 21 minutes to the airport. Inbound Eisenhower, 29 minutes, 390 to downtown, outbound the same. Mount Stevenson, traffic's a little heavy first approaching the Veterans Memorial Tollway and then approaching the Ryan. 30 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. The inbound Ryan, it's 16 minutes from 95th to downtown. Northbound Tri-State, the ramp to the outbound Ike is heavy. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Jim, thank you. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our AM 560 Weather Center, dense freezing fog over the area. Thick cloud cover as well, I-36. Currently 25 at O'Hare. Next news coming up at 8. Continuous news coverage at 560theanswer.com. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and updating you on some of the new COVID lockdown strictures around the country, both actual as well as proposed. Manhattan Beach, California, removing all public seating, all park benches and seating in public, so that you stay locked in your home. Right. Give you a little bit more encouragement, since apparently Gavin Newsom hasn't been encouraging enough to this juncture.
Yeah, instead of, they used to put like crime scene tape on the benches and on the picnic tables outdoor. Now they're actually physically removing them.
Well, the suggestion had been made. The suggestion had been made previously that restaurateurs should be held accountable for where their patrons eat when they pick up the food and go. So if they're congregating outside of their restaurant, or they're congregating in a public park, somehow the restaurateur is supposed to then take it upon himself to serve as a sentinel of the state and shoo people away. Get back to your home. Flee thee to a nunnery. It is remarkable, but that's not the most remarkable development I saw over the holidays.
What?
That comes from the other coast, New York State.
Oh, the Cuomo camps? COVID camps?
Cuomo COVID camps. This is legislation that has been filed in the State Assembly in New York. It is Assembly Bill A416, for those of you scoring at home.
Thank you, Dan.
Which, among other things, this I'm reading from the language, upon determining by clear and convincing evidence that the health of others is or may be endangered by a case, contact, or carrier, or suspected case, contact, or carrier of a contagious disease that, in the opinion of the governor, after consultation with the commissioner, may pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health, resulting in severe morbidity or high mortality, the governor or his or her delegee, including but not limited to the commissioner of the heads of local health departments, may order the removal and or detention of such a person or a group of such persons by issuing a single order, identifying such persons either by name or by a reasonably specific description of the individuals or group being detained, and so on and so forth. You get the picture. I think detention is the operative word in that legislative language. If only we had some historical precedents we could lean on for consideration of such a proposal as detention camps, where people can be detained and whisked away at the behest of the head of a state. God, are there any examples I can think of? So I just want to understand how this would work in practice, because concurrent to that story was a story in the New York Post over the weekend. Photos show thousands crammed into a Brooklyn synagogue for a funeral. New photos obtained by the Post showing thousands of maskless mourners jammed inside a Williamsburg synagogue for a funeral during the COVID pandemic. And de Blasio were trying to get the truth of what happened here. We take this stuff very seriously, and so on and so forth. So I just want to understand, if that legislation I referenced were made law in New York State, then these Jewish mourners could be rounded up as a group and put in a detention camp?
Oh my God.
Any
this is
civil
a scary
libertarians
America that we were living in.
any self-styled civil libertarians on the left, is that raising any red flags for anybody?
Well, I went to Hawaii, and you have to get tested before you go, and then when you get there, you have to get tested again. And if you tested positive because it was a rapid test, they slap you with a red bracelet. They take you to your hotel, and you have to stay in your room, and they have people outside to babysit you, to guard you. I mean, this is not in America. Who signed up for that? It's
Well, that is
scary
a
times we
kindler,
live in.
gentler. That is a kindler, gentler detention. At least they're not inscribing the numbers permanently in your arm. At least not yet.
Well,
For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by David Marcus, who's the New York correspondent for the Federalist.com. He's also a contributor to the aforesaid New York Post. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're a New Yorker.
how's it going?
Are you going to be lobbying for A416?
No, I won't be. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's the first thing that everybody in New York thought of when we saw this, because we know that both Cuomo and de Blasio have been going so hard against the Orthodox Jewish communities here in the city, who actually don't have, who haven't had particularly staggeringly high rates of infection or death or anything. So yeah, it's frightening. I mean, what you're seeing at this point has moved into just mass hysteria. I mean, you guys mentioned the restaurants, right? New York City closed down indoor dining, I think it was about 3 weeks ago now, after it had been open for approximately 2 months, a little more. The New York Post and Republican politicians demanded from Cuomo that he release the contact tracing data that would show us exactly how much of a threat indoor dining was. So on the very day that he closed it down, he released that data, and 1.43% of all cases in New York State were traced to restaurants. 1.43%.
Just like
And
Illinois.
he shut them down.
Yep.
I mean, it's unfathomable. And ultimately, and I think you guys are hitting on this too, this is no longer a story about science. This is all about politics and our constitutional rights, and whether the American people are going to, stand up for their own rights, because this is getting very scary.
And what about gyms? Aren't those closed as well? Because our contact tracing data that was released, less than 1% are associated with gyms and health clubs.
Yes, we had similar numbers. I believe our gyms are open. I'm not really a gym guy, but I believe our gyms are at least partially open. I think you have to wear a mask while you're working out. But, nobody wants to downplay.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said, because this is just about power. This is just about politics, which is a synonym. This whole hand-wringing by the most political of actors on the national stage. It's sad that the vaccine has become political. It's sad that masks have become political. Actually, it isn't, because if they don't become political, then free-loving people are just going to get steamrolled by these politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. 110 years ago, the Irish writer William George Russell said, experts should be on tap, not on top. And it's really something that we need to think about now. We need experts. We love experts. It's incredibly important to have the information that they give us. They can't be our dictators. We have to take that information and then, as a free people, decide how we're going to react to that information. And in certain states, like yours, like mine, like California, that is not what's been happening. We've had these insane regulations that obviously aren't working. I mean, I saw Fauci on TV yesterday saying, well, if it gets worse, we may have to go into lockdowns in places like California. May have to.
May have to. What?
What are you
living under a rock?
About?
He's like Crocodile Dundee. That's not a lockdown. I'll show you a lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me. And Newsom's approach seems to be, this isn't working, let's do more of it. And I also want to say, what I was going to say about, nobody wants to downplay this because obviously this is a terrible disease and we've lost so many people to it. But what's happening in California right now is bad, but it's not comparable to what happened in New York in April. The highest death toll that we've seen in all of California, which is more populous than New York, is about 98. Back in April, we were seeing 1,000 people a day dying in New York State. Mm-hmm. So we're in a very different place with this disease. We have vastly more treatments. We're not putting people on ventilators. It's serious. It certainly is. But it's not where we were in April. And so to react to it even more harshly than we did in April just doesn't make any sense.
Well, that's right. But all of this stuff is immaterial. I mean, it doesn't matter if Fauci says that I was giving numbers based on where I thought public opinion was, what I thought the American people would handle, and I'll move those numbers around depending on what I think the American people can handle and when. It doesn't matter that Dr. Birx says that going home to winterize my house in Delaware somehow is not the same thing as traveling for the mere mortals over which she lords as well, and then she has to resign under the pressure from this controversy. Oh, it's so sad. She's the victim in all of this. We have placed this actually a misunderstanding of science, like it's a thing rather than a process. But we've placed this word science on the top of a mountain over to which we all bow. And so anything that anybody does invoking science, particularly when it's imposing will, is acceptable, no matter how hypocritical they behave. Gavin Newsom, another good example. De Blasio, another good example. It doesn't matter. None of the data doesn't matter to half the population, at least. The hypocrisy doesn't matter. Anything under the rubric of science is enlightened.
Yeah, but I mean, that would be bad enough. I mean, that would already be a bad situation, but it's even worse than that because Scott Atlas is a scientist, right? We have all kinds of scientists who are saying this is a really bad idea. And those people are mocked. Those people are silenced, except for on certain outlets or in certain outlets. If you try to talk about comparing the data between places like Florida and Texas and New York and California, where the states that were more open are clearly doing better, both in terms of COVID and obviously economically, that's apparently not science. So,
well,
yeah,
I mean,
it would be.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, was, the New Republic's, evil person of the year. And it doesn't. It's you're right. It's worse than that. So it's sort of the idolatry of this concept of science, as however it's defined, combined with the all of the institutional power of the left in media and cultural institutions, marginalizing anybody who dares to, cross their power grab.
Yes, absolutely. And the precedent that it is laying down really should scare every American because, and I think we may have talked about this on your show before, but this is not only not the last pandemic we're going to face. This is not the last public health crisis. And remember those words, right? Because we have states that have called racism a public health crisis. Mm-hmm. But climate change is a public health crisis. So if the rule now is if we have a public health crisis of climate change, then my goodness, that means we have to suspend some constitutional rights. We're in for a long ride here and an ugly and bumpy one.
Can you imagine what the reaction would be in this time in America if the median age of death was under 50 and if the mortality rate was, instead of 0.1%, it was 1%? Can you imagine what we would? I mean, we'd be North Korea.
Yeah, I think that's right. In March, I have a book called Charade about the pandemic and the lockdowns that's coming out. And one of the things that I talk about is the 1968 Hong Kong flu pandemic that killed 100,000 Americans. And I mean, that's something that up until this year, very few people who weren't alive then even knew happened. Mm-hmm. It was horrible. But obviously, we didn't do anything like this, right? We had political conventions, we had concerts, we had, it was the height of the '60s in the middle of this pandemic. So I mean, to look at what we're doing now in comparison to that is bizarre. And it is a North Korean model. It is a Chinese model. It is ultimately a communist model that we need to resist.
Well, we didn't have social media back then, because I blame that on it, well, spreading false information and scaring people, really.
Yeah, and again, on the flip side of it, censoring information that might calm people down a little bit.
Yeah, I think that latter point is the big point. And so just on that sort of a jumping off point, specifically Josh Hawley, what do you think? It's almost separate and distinct from objecting to the electoral count on Wednesday. It's Hawley using that as another opportunity to pound big tech, and that's why he's separated from those other 11 senators led by Ted Cruz that are calling for this election commission. Just sort of the philosophy of taking every opportunity that anyone has to raise the specter of what big tech, the power big tech wields, more powerful than, frankly, the government. We spend so much time talking about government, and we spend some time, but it doesn't seem enough time talking about corporate America generally and big tech specifically.
Yeah, I mean, look, for big tech and big corporations, this has been such an enormous windfall. In March, I had a dry cleaner and tailor that I went to on my corner. By next week, that's going to be a Popeyes. That's happening all over the country. That was an immigrant-owned small business. Now, this might be a franchise, right? But that's not the same thing. These are independent businesses. And as far as big tech goes, there's an enormous conflict of interest because they make so much money from people being locked in their homes that if they are also the ones who are deciding what can and cannot be shared through social media, taking orders from the Chinese government in terms of like what shows up on the news, it becomes a perfect storm that's absolutely in their benefit. And so Hawley's exactly right that we need to focus on big tech and come to understand just how powerful they really are right now.
He is David Marcus. He's the New York correspondent for the Federalist.com. He's also a contributor to the New York Post. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
AM Woodland and Lots Custom Carpentry would like to take a moment to show their support and stand up for our police, fire, and all first responders. Thank you for your service, especially in these difficult times. Know that the AM Woodland families are praying for you every day. They believe that when first responders get home safely, they should be able to enjoy their home inside and out, and encourage you to call AM Woodland and Lots Custom Carpentry to build your